email? Yeah. Okay. No, I just want to make sure you got it. I saw documentation.
Aging myself,
Did you get mine?
I remember it happening.
That's that one.
Okay, we're live.
Luke.
Dave, you're live. Get started. Okay, call to order and start with the roll call.
Councilmember Raptor?
Here,
Councilmember Murphy?
Here.
Councilmember Risberger?
Here.
okay. And also note that we have the city administrator here. So the first order of business is approval of the minutes from the March 7th meeting. I'm fine with them.
Look good to me.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, they're fine.
Good, so we're done with that. Public comment, do we have any public comment? All right, so we only have, so far, 2 items to discuss. The first is review of issuance of special use permits for Greek organizations. And Dave, that's something you were...
Well, I honestly, I don't remember asking to have it put on here. Not to say that I didn't ask it to be brought to the legislative committee. This seemed to be more of an issue with how the planning commission was doing business. And I had a long back and forth with the chair, and I brought it to the councils, so they were aware of it. And I think it's, from what I've seen in our code, and I'll read the code.
Sure.
86-16B1, fire safety and property maintenance inspections of buildings or structures which contain an area of public assembly or a, quote, fraternity, sorority, chapter, or membership association house, bless you, as defined in chapter 300 zoning, 300-4, shall be performed at least once every 12 months. I'll take that one first. It hadn't been done yet when everything came to the planning commission, and the planning commission was, if I hadn't put a stop to it, they were going forward with the vote. The only thing I would maybe suggest with this one is, do we want to include in here the inspection, and I'm not sure exactly how to do this, but do we want to make sure the inspection happens before the renewal happens? It makes no sense to have the renewal before the inspection. Or do we even need that? I mean, one thing Stephen and I had talked about is that it's very possible everything was brought in front of the planning commission a month early for some reason. The second half of this was under 300-34, K2 through 4, reasons to deny a special use permit renewal clearly says 3 items. The tenants at the property were issued more than 3 noise ordinance violations during the previous 12 months. The property meets the definition of a public nuisance found in Chapter 184 of the City of Oneonta Municipal Code. And 3, the property fails to comply with the maintenance and building standards found in this chapter. Now, it doesn't say exactly if they don't meet these, the SUP is not renewed, but there was no way for us to verify that none of this happened because we didn't have a police report, and normally we have a police report before they come forward to us. So my other question is, do we need to codify that a little more in this code? Or is this okay and we just need to make sure that we all do our due diligence and make sure that everything happens in May in the planning commission and the inspections happen before that? And we have a police report.
I guess what would be the difference between changing the code now or keeping it as it is if planning commission isn't on the ball with it?
Good point.
Is that it will make a difference?
Good point. And I brought this up at the planning commission, and it was, the chair was very defensive for saying that the planning commission knows what they're doing, but they clearly did not. And I'm okay saying that, because the meeting would have been done in 5 minutes, and they would have been approved. So is it a matter of we need better education from the planning commission, or do we need to make a change? Or what? And I don't have the answer exactly.
Well, I know in zoning, when there's a variance being requested, there needs to be documentation, or it's the variance in a sense, you supply additional information about what is,
Any board or commission can incorrectly issue a like, the zoning board can issue a variance essentially illegally,
Yep.
just like the planning commission could issue a special use permit without following the code. We could just be sued.
there,
The difference is, there's, in this case anyway, I think there's much more danger involved with the planning commission issuing these without a police report, without a fire inspection, versus the variance being given when it doesn't meet the 4 criteria from the state. So I think it's fair to say that's correct in this case anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
I-
so if the planning commission issues a special use permit and the Greek organization hasn't had a fire inspection, we're still gonna do fire inspection because it's required. There's an administrative fee process attached to it. I mean, the issue that we hit this year is the SUP and the inspections were all supposed to be done in November. We're trying to get away from that May schedule. I don't know why Hartwick hasn't been more, and I'm hesitant to say this, but I don't know why Hartwick hasn't been more aggressive. In the past, when Paul Habernig was the Greek life person, he was much more involved. We haven't seen that level of involvement since Paul was moved to a new position. So we've been trying to get a hold of Hartwick to try to figure out like who's a better contact up there. Part of the problem you run into is you have a disconnect between students that live in the housing and the individuals that own the house.
Right.
So like the students come to the planning commission thinking that they're ready to do a presentation for an SUP, and then the landlord says, oh, well, I didn't realize that.
And one of the houses has a new landlord, it's a new owner of the house.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's been kind of I think the issue that we're seeing here is we haven't had a super involved Hartwick since Paul Habernig. So I know that before, he had kind of come to all the meetings, he came to the planning commission meetings, he met with these Greek organizations, and this year we just haven't had that.
Well, this actually makes me more concerned if we have less involvement, or it's harder to get Hartwick involved with the process. It makes me think we're gonna have this issue more often than we have in the past. And it makes me also wonder, maybe we should make a change here.
Tell me what is the change that well, it sounds like we had a person at Hartwick who was on the ball and supplying this information. He knew the information was necessary, is that correct?
He was just a central contact.
He was a central contact. But do we take the initiative to get that material, or is that
I think
material
it's-
simply?
I think it's a combination of both. I think one is, we need to get in hold of them to make that inspection happen. But then who makes the contact with in the past, who's made the contact with the police department to get any kind of a police report saying this happened or this didn't happen?
So we sent all the SUP information to city staff, Hartwick, SUNY, and all the fraternities in September of 2021, requesting that they have all these inspections done by November 1st.
What goes to the police department though, since they don't do an inspection, or are they part of the maintenance and building standards?
Yep, they come with us. The fire department and the police department are part of our, so when we do these housing inspections now for the fraternities, we bring a representative from the police department as well as from the fire department. So we do like a group walkthrough through all of the houses. So it's a housing inspection, it's also a chance for the police and the fire department to look at the houses and identify, potential issues that they might have that are different from what the code office is looking for.
Okay, so that was sent out in September.
Yes.
Sounds like there's multiple levels of things that should have happened that didn't. So, Greg, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I haven't been involved in this process before, but I would certainly be happy to talk with Stephen and others from the city side as to how we can make the process go a little smoother in the future, but I don't have any much more substance to add at the moment.
Is this, would this be analogous to what happens in zoning, if there are certain things that are required?
There's an
Variance can be
entire packet.
discussed.
Yeah, there's an entire packet that includes, they're required to have a certificate of compliance, they're required to, I mean, it's all part of a pretty large packet that is part of the application process.
Again, just saying, zoning would consider a variance without having the information,
Ideally, yeah,
ideally.
yeah. I mean, boards and commissions are free to make determinations that they, I mean, any of these boards or commissions can issue a variance or a special use permit with or without that information.
I'm more familiar with zoning than I am with
I
planning.
think the difference with this versus zoning, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's, when I'm talking about being required for an SUP in this particular case, seems more like it's inferred, not, it doesn't say in the code directly, you will present this and this when trying to obtain your SUP at the planning commission. But it does say that the property maintenance and safety inspections are done every 12 months, and that you can deny a renewal if A, B, and C have happened in the last year, since the last one. So you can assume that you should have that information in front of you when making a decision of whether they have it renewed. But it doesn't directly say, this is required as part of your packet. So do we need to codify that in the code, or do we need to look at our procedure and find out, okay, why didn't anything happen after September 21st? And talk with Greg, because at that point, how long had you been on your position? In September?
July.
Yeah, so it was still, you were still pretty green at that point, so I think it would be fair to say.
I mean, there are plenty of city processes that just happen that I'm not involved in. So it's certainly something we can look at together. I don't want to speak on it right now because I'm just not familiar with it right now. So I don't know what to say.
Okay.
My only.
Come on, I can ask, I heard what you said, that a board or commission can do what it wants, it can go rogue and say, we don't care about that, and so we're just going to permit
The
this.
zoning board of appeals can issue a zoning variance based on what they feel meets the standards of what they think maybe a variance should be issued for. And they can get sued over it. The
Okay.
planning commission can do the same thing with a special use permit and risk getting sued over it. So those boards and commissions
Well,
have
we
requirements
can
that
sue for, and it would be the city suing, suing to
Or the
reverse that
neighbor.
decision. But it,
Well, we're talking about public safety in this case too, with an SUP. So, I mean, I don't think, that we all wouldn't like to see the situation where they issue an SUP and a fire inspection hasn't been done, or
Sure.
there have been lots of problems at the house, and then something really bad happens, 5 months down
I
the
mean,
road.
the first thing for the conditions for denial of a permit is the property fails to meet the standards of the certificate of compliance,
Yeah.
meaning you don't have a certificate of compliance.
Right.
So if the fraternity organization comes to the planning commission without a certificate of compliance, that would be grounds to not renew their permit.
Mhm.
I mean, so obviously the planning commission could then opt to ignore the code and issue a special use permit, but they could do that anyway.
What part of the code was that in, Stephen?
Section K, 300-34, it's the first subsection, section K. You've got,
Wait, that was in K1?
yeah,
Oh, the one I didn't copy. I had K2 through 4, so.
yeah, so I mean, basically, like, the first section is if you come and you don't have the certificate of
Yeah.
compliance, which none of these houses currently do, planning commission should not issue a special use permit. They could, I mean, it says shall, they could opt to do that, but that would obviously leave us open to.
Did they not have their
78.
certificate of compliance at the time they came in front of the planning commission? Or I
Correct.
missed that? So it should have been denied just based on that.
Correct.
This sounds like more of a massive educational problem.
I certainly will say that our boards and commissions can always benefit from, annual trainings and that sort of thing.
Well,
It can never hurt.
Putting it
The
nicely.
other thing is, I know with zoning, they are required to have annual training.
Right.
Same with
And
planning.
that annual training need not be sending people to Cleveland or anything special for an event. It could be training that's provided by the city attorney or by a code officer. But to say, yes, we really do need to institutionalize or say there is a requirement for training, and however we need to make that happen.
Who monitors when the education happens for those two boards? Is it just the state, or does anybody in the city keep track for them?
I know that we've provided typically the webinars that they,
We do the NICOM webinars.
Yeah.
we
and
do
then sometimes the SAGMOR does their training.
Planning Federation training.
Well, that's not exactly what I mean. I mean, like.
They have, some of them in the past have notified us that they've received training. There are some that are a little more on the ball than others.
But there's nobody here to tell them, hey, you haven't done this training and it's
Mhm.
getting toward the end of the year.
And the other issue that you run into with training is training, you go for a 3-day training, you get your 24 hours or however long your training is, you're good for 6 years.
And not all of that training is super specific to like this type of stuff. I mean,
Right.
it's very like,
Broad.
Yeah.
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 Well,
I mean, typically what we do is we attempt to not put applications in front of the planning commission or the zoning board that, the idea is that the applications are complete. What we've kind of run into is when people pay the fee and people request to be put in front of the board or commission, we've erred on the side of let the board and commission review the application, then deny them, versus me preventing them from going in front of the board. That's just been kind of a direction we've gone to prevent people from saying they're being prevented from being heard. So we determined that if they pay the fee, if they put a bad application together, it's part of the board and commission's job to review the application and say, you did not complete the application and we're denying your application. Try again, pay the fee again, come back when you're ready.
I think what's just disturbing to me is there was no certificate of compliance. The inspections hadn't been done yet, and we had no report from OPD saying whether there were any issues for the last year, and they were gonna approve this within 5 minutes.
Wonder why.
So, and the chair wasn't here. So, it was our new vice chair. Okay, John, what would you like to do? I mean, I would suggest
Yeah.
going through Greg, and Greg coming back maybe at the next meeting and giving us an idea of what he's planning on doing to try to improve this. But it sounds like it's a matter of education and
It's
due
ensuring that
diligence.
people have received their training
Yeah,
and then follow when in fact, if there are documents that are missing, to say that's not something that can be put
yeah,
aside or ignored. Now, boards and commissions are often working without, we're not monitoring in terms of compliance in that regard. Greg, would you be in the best position to know that this board, a board or commission, especially planning and zoning, people have had the training?
I could attempt to put myself in a better position.
Yeah,
I can tell you
they're-
any training records of boards and commissions.
Hmm?
I couldn't tell you any training record or
Yeah.
status at this
Well,
point.
how many credit hours are they supposed to do? Do we know per year?
4 per year.
Wouldn't that just be a matter of setting up a quick spreadsheet and having tell the chair, whenever anybody's done their credit hours, report it to the chair and he could email it to you and pop it in there?
Yeah, I think we can set something
I
up.
mean, I've got to have 12 per year, and if I don't do it, I lose my license. So, it's not that hard for them to do it, so. But then again, you're right, it may not have covered this. So it comes to, the chair needs to, maybe the chair needs to be the one to step up and educate the rest of the board.
Well, the idea of who's doing the education, et cetera, is always a bit up in the air. There were times when, I remember in zoning, that there was an off-site conference that was provided, generally in a nice place. And, surprise, people from the zoning group tended to go and take advantage of that, get all that training done, but also have dinners and, and that sort of thing.
Well, John, the other thing I realized the other day, looking at the planning commission,
Mhm.
there's been an awful lot of change over in the last 3 years. I mean, would it be fair to say that?
Yes.
So, like, significant, when I'm thinking of who was on there that's not on there anymore. So I think that's part of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And whoever should be, in a sense, the chair is in the best position to see if people are maintain their qualification, unless we want to have that documented in some other way and provide it to Greg.
Maybe I'll bring it up to the planning commission. I'm not gonna make any friends, but I'm not there to make friends.
Well, there's supposed to be training. I don't know if that's anything that should be offensive to someone.
Well, I mean, just throw a wrinkle in. I mean, the chairperson of our planning commission often leads trainings. So, I mean, Danny actually has done these mandatory state trainings.
For the rest of the board.
Well, I'm saying he actually has done webinars where other boards are getting credit because he's leading the training. So that's, I mean, he's well aware of how that process works.
I'm just wondering about the rest of the board.
Again, if anyone can do the training, our code officer can do the training, someone qualified by experience or knowledge can do what that is. It doesn't have to be an off to a seminar and a couple of overnights at a hotel. It can be done by the city attorney, it can be done by Steve Early, and just to, again, institutionalize it,
Yeah.
to say this has to happen. And again, it's a bit, whatever the training is not verified, it's not vetted by a third party saying, this is fine, this is okay, or this was an incompetent trainer, or it's not a sufficient number of hours. It's very vague.
Yeah.
So if we were on, which boards need training? Zoning, I know, and planning. That's a state requirement. For a person to be on a board, they should be, on one of those boards, they should have evidence of training. That could be something we set up, that could be satisfied by a third party, offered seminar, or it could be something that we do internally. But if we need to have people, and I've seen people on the zoning board when I was the liaison, clearly not knowing what they were doing.
So have I. I've shown up to the meetings and read the 4 qualifications, and it was very clear that some members did not know what those qualifications were.
Well, there's that, but the training and whether or not the person is acting with the knowledge
Yeah.
that was provided in that training.
But, yeah, I guess my point is, I'm agreeing with
Because
you, John,
as Stephen
because
says,
that's
the
like-
zoning board can do what it wants.
Right, but New York state law has very strict strict guidelines of what you're supposed to meet to provide a variance. So,
So in that,
okay.
there should be no one sitting on the zoning or planning board who has not completed the required training as prescribed by the state. Or is required by the state. Does that make sense? You know, your butt should not be in that chair voting on something if you have not had training within, and I'm not sure what that is. And we could provide that training. Doesn't have to be an expensive off-site, overnight required.
Well, I know Nikon provides webinars that,
And it could be those, it doesn't have to be, but again, you have to have the record that the person has sat through the training. So, that's,
I'll bring this up to some degree at the next planning commission meeting, because I'm assuming the Greek organizations are going to be back. So
they will not actually be back this month.
they're not.
Yeah, we reached out to the Greek organizations and let them all know that we didn't feel that it was worth sending public notice until they've... Another aspect of this is we publicly notice these meetings, so
Yeah.
if they keep showing up and we keep noticing, it's an expense to the city.
So their packet essentially is still not ready.
Correct.
Okay. Well, it'll be brought up at some point, so.
well, who owns, who's responsible for the keeping of the record, so to speak?
What do you mean?
Record.
If I go into training, do I tell anybody about that, or is it?
That's what we were asking. It sounds like there isn't anybody that's
Yeah.
keeping track. And I think that, and maybe we want to bring this up at the council meeting when we report on this
Well, it's a
meeting here.
it's a qualification for a person who's sitting on one of those boards
Yes.
to have been trained before they are,
I think we, as a council, if we're going to approve people to be on these boards, and there's state guidelines, I think we have a responsibility to the residents of the city to make sure that the continuing education they're supposed to be getting is being done. So, I
so
mean, I
to
would
me, that
suggest
would
that
be
he has
either
some way
there's
of
a notice to
monitoring.
the, I don't know if it's the council decision, so it might be the mayor or the city administrator who needs to see training is in place, you know, some reasonable way to say this person is qualified to be sitting and voting on a decision. And they have been through some sort of training.
Well, we can demand it also. The only person that could put the person, I mean, you know as well as I do, that the mayor will put a name forward, we vote on it. The mayor is the only one that can remove somebody though. So, but I think we can demand knowing whether or not the credit hours are being done by everybody
Yeah.
that we've appointed.
At the same time, there's a question of whether someone who doesn't have the required training, are they eligible to make a decision that has to do with the zoning variance? Someone's new to the board, they vote yes or no on a variance, but they have not had their training. They may know very, very little about training, or they're getting it from one another. If there's,
Yeah.
so that's a question about how the city or the.
Well, why don't we, when
Yeah.
we report it at legislative committee, why don't we bring that up and we can have a discussion with council about that, see how they feel.
We could, yeah, I just look at it as a clear thing, you have your credits. If you don't have your credits, you are not a fully qualified member of that board.
No, I'm agreeing with you, John. I like to see some, in addition to that, I like to see it cut and dry, something recorded somewhere that so-and-so has.
There, I have, yeah, they generally, I don't know,
So,
it would be either the mayor or the city administrator in a sense, saying, I see the training documents, or you're assuring that people are indeed trained, or it could be, somebody has to look at it and accept the attendance. Essentially, that's what it is.
I think it should be a responsibility of the chair.
Hmm?
I think it should be a responsibility of the chair, and the chair can report it to maybe the clerk sorry, giving you more work. But I know what it is to put in another spreadsheet and just throw in somebody's hours that they've done, what date done.
I mean, these boards and commissions do an annual report. I mean, you could just include it as part of the annual report.
Okay,
Could be included.
So, I mean, just saying, I mean, the board could track, and then at the annual report, be like.
I haven't seen any of these with the annual reports, but you're right, you're supposed to do annual reports. I don't think I've ever seen one for zoning.
no, I haven't,
It's been years they're supposed to be doing that.
They submit them to the mayor.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad I'm wrong. I have nothing more to add on this one, John.
no, I
so-
just think that it's reasonable to expect that people who are on boards that where training is required by the state, complete that training. In a sense, someone's appointed to a board, zoning board, when do they take their training? Can they go a year, 2 years perhaps, and without it, or do they manage it more actively? So,
We moving on?
yep.
Okay.
Tax laws.
So as you know, we discussed, actually, that the council passed one of these meetings ago. There was some discussion about 421M specifically, that was included in the agenda, again, as a handout. We felt as a staff that we just needed to understand these a little bit better collectively, before we could ask the council to act on them. So we asked Hank Checker from the
Great.
county to maybe share some wisdom, a little bit of knowledge on these various tax laws that are available. I know we were looking at 421M specifically. Perhaps we can talk about that, and maybe anything else that might be applicable.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Hugo.
Thanks. I'll forward that along to you too, as the email, the whole text, but this started actually with Len Carson some time ago. He had made the inquiry about it, and it was actually from July 9th of 2021. So, and there's some notes in the margin about different things. The 485H, the first one that's shown here, and I won't go through every one of these, but this one looks like it was adopted for the city of Jamestown, and they, one of the people who was involved with us at Office of Real Property worked in the policy department for a long time and explained to us how they adopt these very narrowly targeted local laws. They usually base it by population as of a given census year, which is to prevent them from being used by other municipalities that wish to mimic the same resolution or local law. These were all passed by the state legislature based on communications with the city of Oneonta does have their own, which I believe is the 485Q, dealing, I think that's the one that deals with the renovation of upper residential housing on ground floor commercial properties. So there's a series of them in here. Some of them have sunset. They were for a limited time, and that time has passed. The star exemption has been replaced by the star check, so there's not much local interest for people moving into a new residence, not a brand new residence, but a new residence for them. And it has been replaced by the check rather than the exemption, which changes things a little bit because the standard mention of the star exemption was touted by the state as being revenue neutral because the money that the taxpayers saved on their school bill was actually forwarded to the school by the state in one check for all the exemptions within that jurisdiction. So other exemptions, you still, if the city needs to raise $1 million for your taxes or $10 million, whatever that amount is, that amount remains relatively constant within your budget year. And and even increases incrementally based on the cap and some other, desire to keep it pretty steady. But any other exemptions, other than the star, which benefit the person who gets the exemption, that cost is borne by all the other taxpayers who don't get that exemption. So, I know there's some enthusiasm about granting exemptions to get certain development to occur. I think the thing that would be better to focus on are projects or a process that puts like an upward curve on your municipal taxable value. Because, for many years, that upward curve existed, and that upward increase in community taxable money was basically the fuel for expenses within your municipal budget. If highway got a new contract, or you hired an additional person, or buy new trucks for a DPW, whatever, because the taxable value of the municipality was, slightly but always increasing. We see now in many of the towns in the county, pretty much of a flatlining of town taxable amount. And that's kind of scary, because you're bound in by the cap. If that flatlines, your municipal costs are generally increasing somewhat, however incrementally, and sometimes largely. There's no real way, it's not funding, it's not self-funding. And that's problematic. So, there are some of these, so I've identified that there is an exemption for physical disability. The only town within the county, of which there's 24 towns in the city, that adopted it was the town of Plainfield. They've had it for a number of years. They did have a person there who was physically handicapped, and at his request, they passed that legislation, and it remains in place. So, yeah, Ginny and I were talking about this too. The artist colony appears to be, there was some confusion on my part about whether the city could unilaterally pass that exemption for them. It appears that they can. I'm just going to have it reviewed by the county attorney to make sure she's on the same wavelength as everybody else, but it looks like that will work. Probably will not come on the roll though, which it's going to be exempt, so there won't be any net difference to you, but they probably make that coincide with the certificate of occupancy, where the year in which they get the certificate of occupancy is within 12 months it'll have to come on the tax roll. So that's not something that they could do at this point. That's still under construction, yes, that building.
Lost of Eats?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still under construction.
Yep.
and according to the agreement, Hank, it is when they receive their certificate of occupancy.
Okay. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about any specific exemptions, but it seems, there are a number of them here. What we were working on with Len was to try to make sure that the ones that were adopted are actively, those are in use, some of them with sunset clause where they ran for a certain amount of time. I would check with the city attorney for your end, and we'll check with the county attorney, but I would guess that the ones that are no longer active, we should probably get out of that, get this whole thing cleaned up a little bit. But just, like I said before, it's sort of just dead-ended. I referred it to the county attorney, and then we had a change of county attorneys, so it might have stalled out on that end. Unrelated to that, I would just point out, Board of Assessment Review members are required to take training on their reappointment. So but that's only once every 5 years, 3 hours. Pretty minimal, does go over some key points. Assessors are required to take 12 credit hours a year, so that process is kind of in place with a lot of different disciplines.
Could you speak a little bit specifically about 421M?
Let's see what we have on that one here. What is the title of that, do you know?
It's for local housing as authorization exemption for certain new or substantial rehabilitation multiple dwellings from local taxation.
See 421E, was this been adopted? Okay.
Description of right on page 5.
Is there, not 5, let's back up on this one.
It should be right after 40. Can't get the flowing order here.
Oh, okay, so,
It's page 10 in your packet.
Yeah, the description's on page 5.
okay, I think the 420, I think this is the one that calls for, so this was 1, 2, or 3 family dwelling, and one of the considerations was that it needed to be owner occupied?
Well, that's where a little bit of my confusion comes in. Because it says, to be eligible, and this is on 3 subsection A, it says such construction or substantial renovation take place on vacant, predominantly vacant or underutilized land. So I'm a little confused, to be honest. Because that's what I was under the impression too, that it had to be occupied, but.
Owner occupied, I mean,
I'm sorry.
that's what I'm getting from this.
Where are you reading owner occupied?
Occupied or is occupied as the residence or home of 3 or
Or more?
independently, well, maybe, yeah, that's,
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about owner occupied for this one.
Prior consideration.
just that it's limited to a 1, 2, or 3 family house. The other thing in this particular one that I've got noted on page 11, such construction of substantial rehabilitation was commenced on or after the effective date of the local law, but no later than June 15th, 2015. So this is one that we had flagged as possibly having sunset. It was adopted in 2013, it looks like, so.
Hank, are you looking at 421M as in Mary?
That's, starting on page, oh, you don't have this with you, but, yep,
They're on page 10 of your packet.
yep. Yeah, it was supposed to say 421M, local law number 3 of
This
2013.
version, it looks different than our version. To be eligible for exemption under this section, ours is written differently. I mean, we've got, yeah, it's not completely the same.
Hank, this is the one that was included.
Of course, how do we know that ours is correct?
Well, I'm looking at the law, or the assessor's manual, with the exemption written in it,
Yeah.
and it says it's multiple dwelling units,
Hey.
other than a hotel, which is to be occupied or is occupied as the residence or home of 3 or more families living independently of one another, whether such dwelling is rented or owned as a cooperative or condominium.
See, Dave.
Oh, no, I see that.
And
No,
that's,
what does it say under 3B, Rudy?
this is the law, so this is not, this is the state paperwork,
Okay,
not
so-
our law. So it's not the same format.
Okay,
It's what
so
our
the
law
state,
is drawn from.
so the state has 3D reading, such construction of substantial rehabilitation was commenced on or after the effective date of the local law, ordinance, or resolution described in subdivision 1 of the section. So,
So this,
Okay.
this one says, the construction or substantial rehab must have begun on or after the effective date of the city, town, or village local law allowing the exemption, but no later than June 15, 2019. See local law option below.
did we add that date? But no later than,
No,
portion of the statement.
I'm reading it from the assessor's manual.
Okay, but that, it's not in, my point is, it's not in there, correct? It doesn't say, there's no sunset date on that.
It says, but no later than June 15, 2019.
So in this pack, I mean, the work that we were doing in this, with this pack was to try to determine which exemptions were on record with the city, and which of those that were on record were either sunset or, I don't know that we have substantial proof here, but what we wanted to confirm was that if there's tons of enabling legislation that's out there by the state, I mean, they churn it out by the ream, and you can't just adopt it because it's out there. There has to be legislation passed making it specific to your community. My fear was that, okay, maybe somebody saw that law and thought it was good, and let's incorporate it into the city. We were trying to get that verified. That process broke down, and we never really got finished up with it. But, I mean, it's certainly a good task to pick up at this point if there's interest.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I have two questions, Hank. One, how would the city benefit from this particular exemption? You know, do you have an opinion on how it would benefit us as a community?
I think the real benefit would be that if there's a run-down house in a neighborhood, and it got renovated to comply, and the amount of the renovation became the exemption. I'm not sure if it's this one. I know I had spoken to someone who's active in the city with renovations, and it was, this may be the one where the base value would stay the same. Say the base value was $50,000, but you put another $100,000 into renovating the house, so the $100,000 amount becomes the exemption. You still have the base that was contributing before to the tax burden, but the new increase is basically sheltered from that or postponed. It goes for a number of years at 100%, then it declines, for certain
And
years.
that's what we're doing with Corning.
Yes, but Corning is under a different, it's a pilot agreement probably. If Jody Zarefsky and those guys executed the pilot agreement with them in conjunction with the city and others, they might use a template, but each one is executed independently. I mean, the benefit with Corning, and the thing that's different than a residential property, is that while they may be getting a break on their taxes, they are employing a number of people who work at the facility, and it puts money into the community, not through real property tax, but just through payroll. So, I mean, the pilot thing has much more flexibility than the rules that we're bound to deal with. So,
So basically if I'm hearing it correctly, the benefit of adopting this exemption would be to the developer, and then the way the city would benefit is that the property would be improved, but not necessarily collecting more tax value on it.
the property would be improved. The other thing is that the exempt portion is not going to generate any tax, so,
And by the time it actually becomes taxable, would be basically,
I think this one talks about 40-year
I
law.
was going to say, this is like 20
Oh,
years.
20 years on this one,
So
yeah.
the house may very well need renovating again by the time that got done.
That's a possibility, I guess, depending largely on who lives there.
Yeah, so, okay. So
John,
to go back to my
I
second
think-
question, sorry.
I know there's lots of questions, but I feel like we're kind of going off the rails a little bit
Okay.
first, because, and forgive me, Jenny, for saying that, but my big question here is, should we even be discussing this right now? Because we brought up the fact that we've got his version that says, under 3B, that this goes until no later than June 15th, 2015. I don't know if this is because this is the copy that we passed as a council and threw in our sunset date. We've also got another version that says 2019, and then we've got the version in front of us that has nothing in there. So I think what we should figure out first is this even something that we can even consider passing, or has this been sunsetted at the state level? That's my question. I feel like we haven't gotten that answered yet. So does anybody have that, do you have that answer?
I do not have, I mean, the point that we left this was that if it's a city exemption, probably the place to get that answer, if it's in force or if it has sunset, is through the city attorney.
Okay.
I mean, we don't pass legislation or deal, we just deal with, if it's on the record, we put the assessor puts the exemption on, we go through it. We'd like to have something in our office in case the comptroller's office comes to audit, that we don't have an exemption on that's not backed up by the adoption of the local law. Because they, for pre-COVID, they were starting to do that, check and make sure they had it at the municipal level as well as the county level, to make sure there aren't exemptions that are on there just because, you know, it looked like a good exemption.
Okay, so we need to find out from Dave Merzig if this is actually an exemption we can still,
The whole pack would probably be a good thing for him to look over, because, I mean, there may be discrepancies with others that we did not resolve, we merely thought we had uncovered them.
I have a question. Do you guys have like access or a report of access of who's had, how do I say this? Do you guys keep track of who's had access to these tax maps and that information since 2015 and prior? Or is that like a violation of privacy?
Access to the tax maps?
oh, excuse me, what's your name and where do you live, please?
Victoria Spataro, at Seago in Kings County.
Okay, you live in the city of Oneonta?
No, I live in West Oneonta.
Okay.
I'm a bit confused about where we're standing with this now. We're trying to,
Yeah, I don't know if that question is for me or for the board, how,
I don't know, I'm not running the meeting.
I don't know,
so-
am I not supposed to be here since I'm Westo?
No, you
No, you
can,
can
you can
be-
attend the meeting. We have
Oh.
a particular time when people in the, where you are sitting can ask questions. These are people that work for the city, for City Hall though.
Oh,
let's
gosh.
pull back a second. That's true. I mean, we're
Right.
not, we're asking for public input yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm a bit confused about where we're standing at the moment.
Where I'm standing is, I don't know, I thought we were coming today to discuss whether we wanted to forward this on to the council, but now it sounds like we don't even know if this is something that's available to us anymore from the state. And you're right, if it's available through the state, then we have to adopt it here at the city level, which is what we did years ago, but we put in a sunset for, it was either 1 or 2 years. I have a feeling, that's why I suspect that the date that's here, Ginny, is one that we put in. But you were talking, I think you mentioned about a 2019 date also.
That's what I'm reading out of the.
But you said that, Judy, that's
Yeah,
right.
that's in the assessor's manual, so we have.
Three
that.
versions of this law in front of us right now.
Right, it could be that the state, it sunsetted from the state in 2019.
Yeah, I don't know that, because I'm not an assessor, I just printed this off and brought it with me. Because it shows what the law
Right.
is.
I just don't want us to waste our time if this is something that's not even available to us.
My understanding when I started, because these used to be on the community development website, you could click on them and get to the assessor and forms and stuff. And my understanding was that anything we would pass at that time was done. And I started in October of 2016. But I don't have that, in writing and official and formal through council or anything like that. But so we actually did away with those links because they were no longer active. And it was for whatever we had passed at that time. And that's, hearsay.
So I guess if I may make a suggestion, before obviously we bring this to the council, we need to know if we do that. What would be the next step to figuring that out? We'll go to Merzig to figure out which.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
I think
that
we
makes
should-
perfect sense to me. I think we're,
should do that.
Yeah, I don't think we should, I feel like we could be wasting everybody's time.
there's more to this than we're capable
Yeah.
of making a judgment on at the
Yeah.
moment. Because originally, the tax law issue had to do with the Lynn Carson's tax abatement idea
Right.
that you would come up with. And I think we're in a gray area at this point. we're not quite ready to talk about this
Right.
in a way where we bring it to council and make sense of it.
Okay, I'm ready, I got it. So this is an email from Dave Merzick dated
Oh,
February 21st. Len, comma, I've worked my way through all the exemptions and here is what I'm seeing. It looks to me like sections 421-E, 459-A, 470, and 485A did not have any sunset provisions included when they were passed, comma, and so are still in full force and effect. Please take a look at them again yourself and confirm. If I've missed it somewhere, let me know, but they look like they're still in place to me.
Excuse me, Len, you mean at the state level, correct?
Correct. We were asking at the local level, did the sunset clause have an effect? So he researched the local laws, because even though, like Hank said, there's a state law, we as local legislators have to adopt that law and
Right.
make it enforceable. So
Right.
that's what our city attorney has done, is looked at the local laws. Okay?
But he's saying that it's,
We were
he's saying
asking
that they
them
weren't
if they were
sunsetted at the
sunset.
local level.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Next paragraph. Section 421-M has two things that need to be looked at. First is that it applies only to the following zones, R3, R4, MU1, MU2, and the CI district. If that list should be continued or amended, now is the time to do it. Let me know if it needs to be changed and to what. The second thing is the sunset date, which was set on June 15, 2015. Do you want this again to sunset with a specific date or just let it run? Then on to section 457 has a sunset date of December 31st, 2016. Again, do you want to set a new one? I believe we passed on the 457. Let me know what you're thinking, and I'll go back to you with these changes. So our city attorney has already looked at 421-M. And if I reread the last sentence, the second thing is the sunset date, which was set at June 15th, 2015.
Which is the one we established years ago.
I think
Which makes me wonder though, why does that say 2019 then?
I don't know that.
And that's from where again, Judy?
It's out of the assessor's manual, they list the exemptions.
The assessor for the city of Oleana.
State.
For the state.
This is the state assessor manual. I went to look up these laws and printed them out. Because I wanted to see the comparison between the laws and our law and see if anything had changed, recently. So I printed them off. So that needs some more investigation than me just printing them off.
Okay. What exactly is the date in 2019 for that?
This one said, June 15, 2019.
Okay.
So,
Len, my guess is maybe Dave needs to go back and just double check that to see if that's still available from the state.
So I made contact with the chief of staff for our senator, and I actually just asked him yesterday, the day before, where are we at with that? And he said that we need to amend on our end and we'll put it back through.
I'm sorry. can you repeat
We need to amend it on our end and then they'll put it back through.
Okay, so he's saying it's still available.
Correct, we just need to amend it on our end and then it'll go through the state system.
Can I ask a question on that? The state system, does that include the legislature passing a new law?
I'm talking to the chief of staff of the state senator.
But, I mean,
So
it's
they-
not just gonna go back there and get, like, reprocessed, to get it past new legislation to put that in place.
Correct.
So
we amended
this
on
won't be
that.
ready for possibly a year.
And I think the key question, I thought we were gonna be discussing tonight, and obviously we'll need to come back and discuss it further, is do we really want to put this legislation in place? Is it really beneficial to the city?
Well, I still have the question of why does the assessor manual of New York State say it sunsets on June 15th, 2019? And I don't know who would have that answer.
But didn't we just kind of answer that? It needs to go back through and be remade into a new law?
Correct.
So,
At the state level.
No, we, chief of staff said, we've got to amend our end, then we send it to the state and they'll
And the
amend it
state
on their side.
repasses it.
Okay, so there is the answer then.
That's what
So
they-
they haven't passed it,
Yeah, it would have to go and be passed.
so there's no guarantee, yeah, there's no guarantee. we would-
So could I ask a quick question, and I know we're running out of time, but, this law, as I'm reading it, includes new construction and substantial rehab, buildings and vacant areas and stuff like that. So I'm concerned about the costs that we'd be giving up for, or the revenue we'd be giving up for new construction, especially with our development that we're looking at. But the substantially rehabbing existing buildings is a boon for us, I think, and might be worth some of the lost revenue we could get. Can this be changed, so it's just substantially rehab properties, or do you have to go with both in the law?
I think because this, we can't change this, we can adopt it as is or not.
Okay, and so our other concerns, and Greg had mentioned, is, this requires a 20% of the units are affordable, so that means we have to track that. And that's a concern. We have to track that every single year to make sure that the tenants are meeting that requirement, or the landlords are meeting that requirement for their tenants. And that's quite an administrative feat.
Yeah, if you read number 7 of our draft right now, it says the city shall develop an income monitoring and compliance plan
Every year.
every year. So
And then that's submitted to the state. If they're not meeting, sorry, Jane.
Yeah, it's quite all right.
If they're not, I'm trying to rush, if they're not meeting that requirement, then they lose the exemption that year, but then you look at them the following year, so it's an ongoing thing. And if they're not meeting, it, the state says they don't get the exemption, so there's a lot of steps in there that we would have to,
Just
Address.
intervene with this, we're out of time.
I know.
What do we need to do now?
I would like, if this can be brought up again, I have several questions I didn't get to about this piece of legislation. If this can be brought back forward to the committee.
Well, what kind of time, are we under pressure to make any decisions within the next week, 2 weeks, or a month?
It doesn't sound like it, especially if we pass this, the state has to then go back and pass this also, so this could take quite a while.
Yeah, but my thought is that if we need more time, say not necessarily in this meeting, the next time it occurs, but we could schedule a time to get some more clarity on what is worth discussing. Otherwise, we can wait and bring this up again at the next legislative committee meeting or in conjunction with the finance committee.
I'm happy to do that. I don't mind waiting, just as long as we have an opportunity to discuss it, because I think there's 2 or 3 things I have circled in here that we can't we don't
We're just out of time.
Yes.
And we may not have enough time in a 1-hour legislative committee meeting to cover these things. Is it worth scheduling some additional time to get some clarification, or just we want to wait until the next?
I know it's a month out, and it might be silly to ask this. Does anybody know of anything coming up within the next month that would be on legislative committee's docket? Again, I know it's a month out, but
Anything could happen.
I would say, John, that maybe if we can put it on the agenda for next week, and if something comes up, we
Next
can.
month?
Next month, thank you.
That's fine.
And then we can touch base, if that's
What we
okay?
know and what we don't.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Len, thanks for jumping in.
Knowing
Why they
what
don't
we know.
interrupt?
Well, you want to clarify things for me.
Read my mind.
All right,
We've been
I will,
like sweating about that.
in interest of
every
time, we
it's
have
come up.
to adjourn this meeting.
Please.
Adjourning this